All right, so hopefully this is the last, last one. Last point to make about rape and sexual assault is the criminal justice response, and it's a topic that's come up in this class. It usually comes up in other classes. That part of the reluctance of a lot of folks to step forward is that they fear the sort of stigma, and the shame, the embarrassment, the trial process if it goes to trial. And so it's often very difficult to report that you have these in-depth interviews with police investigators. You have to go to the hospital, the prosecutor, and the representatives of the prosecutor's office, and so on and so forth. And part of the issue is they're hard cases to win sometimes if it is a so-called he said, she said, where the sexual contact is not in doubt, but the intent and consent is the major issue. And so prosecutors have to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that a crime occurred. They are there for a brisk interrogation to make sure everybody has their facts right. You have defense attorneys that their whole point is to advocate for their defendant and make the best case, and sometimes the best case is to be made by attacking the defendant. And it used to be that they had all kinds of license to do that, and the primary strategy was to portray typically a female victim as sexually promiscuous and attack her credibility that way. We do have laws now that prevent some of that. It depends on the jurisdiction and the circumstance. But prosecutors are trying to win cases, and so they will do things like plea bargain to get conviction for an aggravated assault versus a sexual assault, because all they're interested in is punishing somebody. Whereas the victim in the crime might feel as though that person didn't get properly punished, and treatment providers are going to have trouble because they didn't get charged with a sex offense. I think a lot of that's changed lately with the advent of sex offender registries and wanting to get that in the record and those sorts of issues. But these are very difficult cases for the person involved and oftentimes for the criminal justice system. All right, so we talked about homicide, we talked about rape and sexual assault, and the third of the serious violent crimes is robbery. So again, robbery is different from burglary or theft in that you use violence to take somebody's stuff. Like other crimes, robbery's been on the decline, but it does make up a good chunk of serious violent crimes. So of the four, 30% of them are serious robberies. And it's like other things, it's a crime that, like robbery and sexual assault rape, or like homicide and sexual assault rape, robbery is a crime, like getting mugged out in the street is a crime that drives a lot of perception and fear. Robbery is unique in a variety of ways, and it kind of goes to the nature of a crime. The majority, over 50% of robberies are perpetrated by a stranger. It's the only serious violent crime, but that's true. That's true. So it tends to be more likely to be a stranger. If you think about like a mugging, that makes sense. It oftentimes involves multiple offenders. It is often an interracial crime, which again, you think muggings as opposed to an assault between people who know each other. The majority of folks convicted or arrested for robberies tend to be African American and male. And the most common locations, if you think about it, the street, and this is the sort of mugging, walking down the street, being confronted, that a lot of Americans fear, or within residences. This is like the home invasion, or a burglary that turns into a home invasion because somebody thought that people weren't home and they turned out to be home. And at that point, when they're confronted, it becomes a robbery and not just a burglary. Obviously, the primary motivation for most robberies is money, but people who have looked at the sort of culture around robbery and sort of high-rate robbers have found that there are a host of secondary motivations. That robbery was one of the things used to build a street rep, like that. To build a rep on a street in certain neighborhoods. If you're able to rob people and impose your will on them, that builds up your rep. It's used as fuel for drug and alcohol and partying in that street culture. They'll report that there is a certain sort of psychological thrill to sort of imposing your will on other people, and these tend to be people who lack power in other situations that now find themselves in a position of power, and there's a certain charge that folks get from that. Robbery is also used in a lot of neighborhoods in a lot of ways as a form of intimidation. intimidation and revenge between people who know each other. And so it's one of the reasons that there is a good chunk of robbery that happens between people who know each other, that in a lot of neighborhoods it's used as a form of intimidation, used as a form of revenge for past crimes. In terms of how rational it is, folks have pointed out that there is sort of upsides to robberies, that it takes less time. Like literally you just have to walk up to somebody in the street. Often you get cash, although I suspect people are a lot less likely to carry cash now than they were 15 years ago. But you avoid the middlemen of like burglary, where you have to pawn off property. And people who rob do tend to sort of seek particular targets, those that are involved in crime, those that appear drunk or disabled in some way. And so there is a sort of rational component to a lot of robberies. And in that sense, if it's rational, that's going to be subject to the laws of situational crime prevention. So, target hardening techniques do work. So we talked about sort of changing the structure of gas stations, taking crap off the windows, having two tellers, putting bulletproof glass up as ways to target harden a gas station. If you're thinking about yourself, right, the easiest way to not be a target is to travel in a group, to avoid just whipping out a wad of cash in a public place so people know you have it. And the biggest thing is, and this sort of comes up over and over, is refrain yourself from criminal activity. Who's most likely to get robbed? Somebody that has a lot of cash and drugs. And so whenever I see home invasion, the first thing that sort of pops into my mind is, why that house? And sometimes it's random. Most times it's not. And so when you get sort of caught up in a situation where you can't really go to the police, and you have high volumes of cash and other valuables, then your odds of getting victimized go way up. All right, the last sort of violent crime is assault, and aggravated assault is the one that's in the Serious Violent Crime Index. The difference between aggravated and simple is that in aggravated assault, it usually involves a weapon and serious bodily harm, whereas in simple assault, there is no weapon and no serious injury. As I said, this is one of the areas where sort of how police record it may have sort of had an impact on our estimates of how much violent crime is going on. A good chunk of assaults, depending upon the year and on the data source, assaults are more often not reported than reporting. And we've talked about this at the start of class, that, if you think about a simple assault, a fight that doesn't involve a weapon and results in no injury, most people don't even define that as a crime that needs to get reported. They define it as like I got in a scuffle or a fight. Having said that, there are sort of more serious forms of assault that don't get reported, many times for the same reason as sexual assaults don't get reported, that it's not a stranger, it's an acquaintance, it's a family member, you fear reprisal, you're embarrassed, you want to keep it a private matter, and so on and so forth. As you might expect, if you look at who commits assaults, it tends to be young men. And most people who study assaults basically find that the characteristics of those who engage in assault are similar to homicide. In fact, homicide is sort of defined as a lethal assault in that sense. So if you look at violence altogether, I think the big picture is still the pretty dramatic drop in violence in the U.S. And we've talked about this a few times throughout the semester. Be skeptical of anybody who says there is a cause. I was looking at data for this talk and looking at sort of what's happened in the last year and trying to figure it out. And there's a guy that had a web page. He was an ex-police officer for a couple of years and wrote a book about policing. And his argument was basically that this is all about policing. And my mental response was, so when it goes up, it's going to be because of bad policing. So be sure whatever you're looking at makes sense going up and down, right? Like if improved police tactics are part of the crime response that led to crime reduction, when crime goes up, are we going to blame the police? Similar with prison populations, the seductive thing is to say, well, we finally locked up enough people that crime's gone down. And then when it goes up, we say, well, we have to lock up more people. It's likely that both police and prisons have played some role in the crime decline. The issue is how much. And most of the research I've seen suggests that they've played sort of relatively minor roles, but important roles still. Again, there's all sorts of research out there, and it probably is. It's a complex world. There's probably a lot of things that predict it. So be careful now if crime goes up for a couple of years. When people want to whip out sort of explanations for what's wrong, ask yourself, did that make sense as an explanation when crime was going down? Yeah, you know what? This stuff we can pick up when we get back if we need to at all. So I hope you enjoyed your non-face-to-face class period, and I hope the exam went well for everyone, and I will see you on Tuesday.